Welcome to the Colbycast, episode 176. Thank you for joining us. Today, Bonnie and I are happy to welcome Art and Laraine Bennett to the Colbycast to discuss the Temperaments. Art and Laraine help us to understand the Temperaments and to see how knowledge of them can be helpful in understanding ourselves. But perhaps even more importantly, this knowledge can be helpful in understanding how our children act and react and how they approach learning. We hope that you'll enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, Colby homeschooling mom of 4 lads and lasses, liturgical musician, popcorn, and podcast fanatic.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and director of development for Colby Academy.
Good morning, Stephen. It's a big day. We get to have a fun conversation today. I've been looking forward to it. How are you today?
Doing well. I've been looking forward to this as well. Some topics that very much appeal to me. So
yes, likewise, same for me. We have the very great privilege and pleasure of speaking with Art and Laraine Bennett today, authors of several books, speakers whom many of our listeners may have heard in various contexts. So we get to talk to them today. Art and Laraine Bennett, welcome to the Colbycast.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. It's great to be here. Thank you. Yeah.
And we did use Colby Academy at one point.
Yeah. Oh, we want to hear more about that. So would you tell us about yourself for listeners who are not yet familiar with you? Would you tell us about yourselves and your backgrounds and tell us more about that homeschooling experience you have, your time with Colby, and things that stick out in your mind from your homeschooling days?
Sure. You start, Art.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Laraine. Yeah, so I'm licensed as a marriage family therapist. I have been for over 35 years, working with different groups and clients, but I also have some experience in management. I was the president of Catholic Charities for our Diocese of Arlington for 10 years, and I started a clinic, co-founded a clinic called the Alpha Mega Clinic, which integrated the Catholic faith with psychology. That was really exciting, and that. So yeah, we're the parents of 4 kids, and all of our kids are married and have kids. So we have 4 kids and 8 soon to be 10 grandkids.
Yeah. And in fact, the youngest is now homeschooling. She just started homeschooling. So yeah, they're doing a co-op kind of thing. And she has to be the teacher once a week. And she's like, oh no, but she's going to be amazing. She'll be amazing. Yeah. So, Alpha Mega Mental Health Clinics, you mentioned that, right? And I'm the writer, so we have collaborated on 3 books on temperament: the Temperament God Gave You, Temperament God Gave Your Spouse, Temperament God Gave Your Kids, and then we also did a book, The Emotions God Gave You, and then we also did another book that pretty much nobody knows about, called Tuned In. The power of listening and pressing pause. And it's a really good book, but it just kind of like never got promoted too much. Anyway, and then I just wrote a book called The Little Way of Living with Less, Learning to Let Go with a Little Flower. And that's another Sophia Institute book. And then I also created a game, the Temperament. It's Know Thyself, the game of temperaments.
Wonderful. So I have right here my collection, the trio of temperament books. They've lived on my bookshelf for many years. It's kind of funny. I consider we'll get into the temperaments. That's our topic today. I might be jumping the gun here, but I have, from the time I read the first book, The Temperament God Gave You, I deduced that I am phlegmatic with melancholic secondarily, and maybe a little bit of sanguine. And so from that point on, we've had several conversations about personality and temperament and charisms and gifts and things like that. And I just keep coming back to, well, I'm a phlegmatic, and that's just that. And like, I haven't really gone much further with the exploration of other things. Like that's just that. So anyhow, so we'll get more into that. But I have some catching up to do on your offerings, and I'm excited about that. I am a pianist by training. I was a piano major in college. And so I have a sort of unofficial, unscientific, of course, personality classification by instrument, what a person's primary instrument. You tell me what instrument you play, and I can tell you a lot about your personality. That's just kind of my thing I've had from my time interacting with lots of different types of musicians, but let's go in a more scientific direction and more time-tested, verified in lots of very different, more credible ways. Let's head toward the 4 classical temperaments and how you came to know them so well.
Okay.
We were reading a book by Dominican Jordan Aumann, a well-respected Dominican, and he mentioned the temperaments. And I remember saying to Laraine, well, I studied that in graduate school. I mean,
briefly,
that's kind of interesting. I had no idea it was such a big deal in the history of the church. So we started researching it more and discovered there really haven't been a Catholic book written on it since the 1930s.
Yeah.
But there had been some articles and stuff. And then I was doing counseling, mostly marriage counseling, but also sometimes family counseling. And I go, God, this is really helpful. So we kept researching it more and more. I started using it with couples counseling, family counseling, and then we also had opportunities to give talks. And then Laraine goes, well, I think, we have a lot of experience here talking about this, looking at it. So why don't we start writing about it ourselves? And then that's how the books took off. So that's kind of how it happened, I think, right?
There really wasn't a book. It was a chapter in Jordan Aumann's Spiritual Theology, that book. Yeah. And again, the 1930s thing was like a tiny itty bitty pamphlet he would share with you. He kind of like tailed off at the end. He did the phlegmatic and he wrote like 2 pages. He's like, well, I don't know.
That's it. Yeah.
We're like, wait, he's missing this great temperament because you have like one of the best temperaments, And so we were like, we've got to fill this out, flesh this out and have it available for modern contemporary society.
Yeah. Well, we're sure glad you did. It's been
Well, Well, and plus there's this long history, the tradition. I mean, saints have written about it, and as we mentioned, spiritual, authors have written about it. And notably one Pope John Paul I, who wrote a chapter in one of his books, in his book Illustrissimi, he wrote a whole chapter, or actually a letter. He wrote a letter to Hippocrates in which he describes the 4 temperaments, the 4 classic temperaments that we're talking about: choleric or choleric, sanguine, phlegmatic, and melancholic. So that's the old terminology which we are using, we're taking up today, not because contemporary psychologists don't use those terms, but maybe on occasion they do, but overall they don't. They just refer to the actual characteristics in which we have lumped under the 4 as kind of per the traditional Catholic way of doing things, just to preserve that tradition and carrying it forward.
Sure. Well, that suits us quite well, being a classical Catholic homeschool.
Yeah.
So let's take a quick second to define a little more concretely what we mean by temperament in this context, as opposed to like temperamental or because the word temperament or temperamental has several different meanings. So let's take a second to define exactly what we mean about that. And will you then go on to tell us a bit more about the history of the temperaments and kind of an overview of them?
Okay. Well, temperament is not the whole of our personality. We always have to make sure we say that we're not putting anybody in a box. You're never determined by your temperament. You're not determined to react in a certain way, but it is just the way we tend to react from birth. And the thing that's kind of wonderful about it is we say it's a gift from God, because it's like God's way of kickstarting your personality. Because everybody who's had a child, had a baby, they know that they're not blank sheets of wax, with nothing. They have little budding personalities. And that little budding personality is really temperament based, because it's the way we tend to react, not the way we have to react. What else?
No, so I think that's really critical. It's not putting anyone in a box. But it's particularly in a learning environment like homeschooling, where you're always trying to expand the horizon and the depth of the kids. The kids will be tending to have a reaction a certain way, and you're trying to teach them not just to react, but to really respond prudently. And this is where the virtues come in. So, so they start off in second grade, they don't know any times tables, I think. And then by 5-7 months later, they're going to know them all. So how does that happen? How does that growth happen? And some temperaments will be more inclined to learn new things. And some temperaments will be a little bit wary of that. And that, so that knowing the temperament, knowing your temperament, as well as knowing the temperament of the kids, will give you a good idea of what the major strengths are, and also some challenges. And these are not moral weaknesses, by the way. It's nothing to do with morality. It's just some things are going to come easier and harder. And it's really great to know that when you're teaching, particularly with the intensity you can have in homeschooling. We can really, really have it the way it's supposed to be. Individualized formation is not just a cliche in homeschooling. It's really, it's a real deal that the church talks about. So knowing your temperament will tell you what doors are easy to open and which ones will be more of a challenge, and not taking that so personally, just trying to be a little more strategic about it. So I think it's a great tool in education. Actually, I think it's a great tool anytime the agenda is to grow. Right.
Which we should always be doing.
That's right. So it's a great tool for growth.
But also, so the personality itself, one's personality is broader. So that's another point that we like to make, is your personality will include your education, your the family of origin, like are you an only child, or are you from a family of 10? This is going to impact your total personality. What kind of education did you have? What is your culture? What is your cultural background? So these things will all impact our total personalities. And then of course the growth that we have personally committed to, like trying to grow in virtue. But anyway, so temperament is just one aspect in its nature as opposed to nurture, so that part that is in us naturally, so it's kind of like you want to work with your temperament. It's like, if you had a left-handed child, you're not going to force them. Maybe back in the day they did do that, force left-handers to write with their right hand, and it's just going to be hard. It's going to be harder to do that. So it's good to know the temperament and work with it and appreciate the strengths that come with that temperament, but then helping them to grow in virtues in the areas where they might find it a little bit more difficult, which when you're homeschooling, you will always encounter those areas because it's right in your face, as you're trying.
That's one of the things I have long appreciated about the temperaments and your presentation of them, is that these are your tendencies. This is sort of how God created. It doesn't mean like that's just how it is and you're stuck there, or you have no responsibility to grow or to kind of overcome your weaknesses. It's not that, well, that's just how I am. Just deal with it, kind of thing,
Yeah,
that's
so
really
true.
It's a really good point, Bob.
Yeah,
that's true.
So important. Yeah.
So you've named the 4 temperaments: choleric, phlegmatic, melancholic, and sanguine. And these are from antiquity, right? Could you say a bit about that and kind of bring us forward in time a bit?
Yeah, well, I think it's all started with the Greeks, blame it on the Greeks. Hippocrates, and he's trying to account for differences in personality, basically, is what he was trying to do. Like, you always say, here we are on this little Greek island or whatever. It's like, how is it we're all different,
you got the same government, you got the same rules. This is a slave here, this is a free person here. Everything is controlled. So the Greeks were puzzled why people turn out differently. They couldn't figure it out. So his hypothesis was it was something kind of biological, innate in the person, not in the environment. Right. So that really started the kind of thinking, which is, by the way, goes on today every day. A lot of psychologists, a lot of sociologists are materialists, and the environment's everything. And then the Catholic Church is never going to ascribe just to that. It's a determinist view. And so I think that's part of why the church is kind of inclined to work with the temperaments, because it talks about an internally motivated part of our learning style, something from within. Right. And the fact that there's a corporeal aspect, that started with Hippocrates. That's why you have the awkward names. These were different blood types. Or like, the choleric had too much bile, and the melancholic had, I don't know, and the phlegmatic was too much phlegm or something. I don't know. Remember now. But it's not crazy though, because in fact today there's still, if you look at it, like it was really quite brilliant, because when they study temperament today,
they bring in hormones. They talk about, oh, dopamine and oh, this person has an abundance of dopamine receptors or whatever it is, which is essentially the same kind of thing. It's physiologically based.
Because so the neuroscience. So this church is never going to be totally deterministic.
No, never, because we're free.
But also the church honors the body. The body is a factor.
Mm-hmm.
So our corporeal response. So I think the temperaments are at least the prospect of a good integration of the corporeal aspect and the freedom aspect of spirit, let's say, or grace.
Mm-hmm. Because we're never determined. We're never required. We may be kind of hardwired. We say hardwired, but it's it's just your tendency, like a knee-jerk reaction. So each of the four will have a tendency to react in certain ways, but you're not required to.
I'm a double introverted. I'm a phlegmatic melancholic. So I get myself in a new situation, a social situation. My tendency will be, this is awkward. How do I get myself here? Why am I here? I don't like this. But then over time you mature. You go, well, actually, every friend I've ever met, I met in a social situation, and look at all the great things that have happened to me. So over time, you override that tendency. And you actually can start to look forward to the party or the event or whatever. Maybe not with the enthusiasm of Laraine. Laraine just loves parties all the time. So, but I had to kind of acquire, a comfort for that. Mm-hmm. My initial reaction was, I don't like it. I don't want it. That was when I was in early 20s. But then you grow through that, and so you overcome your tendency, the domination.
Or you don't necessarily change your temperament. See, that's the thing. You don't change it, but you grow in other ways. You grow in virtue. So, like with the saints, the only way you can really know what their temperament is to go read what they were like as in their childhood. So because or when they're a young person, St. Ignatius is a great example. He was getting in fights. I think he was thrown in jail once. Yeah. So he was
troublemaker.
He was very choleric. And then they said at the end of his life, he was so meek. He was the humblest and meekest of persons. That did not come naturally to him. He overcame. He grew in heroic virtue. So he's a saint because he practiced heroic virtue. And who's Father Scalia is always telling us about this example is one saint.
St. Francis de Sales.
Was it St. Francis de Sales?
It was St. Francis de Sales, yeah.
Yeah, where he was gripping the bottom. You could look at underneath after he passed away, they looked underneath his desk and there was hand marks where he had gripped underneath his desk to keep himself from exploding at the person that he was talking to. And he appeared wonderful, and kind and gentle. Mm-hmm. Is that how the story goes? Yeah. Yeah. So, anyway. I
didn't know that story. I love that.
Yeah.
I've always liked the temperament a little bit. More, I think, than some of the, I like the temperaments because, as you were saying, to me, when I was working kind of as a manager of people, I always wanted to try to get ideas of what God was calling the people to do, so I could try to move them toward the right direction. So the temperaments was something that I considered, but I liked it that it was more positive. It seemed to me it was something like, this is the way you are. But some of the other theories that I had kind of read about by Jung and such, it seemed like it was coming from more of a place of studying what happens when things are bad, and then you come up with some of the theories from that. But this one always, I read Galen and some of the Greeks when I was in college and thought, oh, bile and then so all of those things kind of came about. But I like that about this. It seems, positive from the beginning.
I think that's really true. I used to do a lot of work planning in a business environment. You did too, Stephen, with Myers-Briggs and things like that. And they're putting you in a box. It's a well-researched box. It's not capricious, but it's a box. So if you're an INFP, you are an INFP, and that you're going to have these assets and these deficits. You got to kind of live with it. Whereas the temperaments has a tendency towards something, but not a determination. And so it doesn't put you in the same kind of a box. And I think you're right about that. It's because it's more aligned with a growth model.
Right.
And that growth is not just adjusting to my personality or temperament. It's a growth model of acquiring new virtues and being able to do new and different things, not just adjusting to the hand I've been dealt. And that's a big difference. And I think that is one of the key aspects of temperament that we like about it as well. But
yeah. However, when you are dealing with young people, like, very young people, you're going to have to maybe be a little bit more cognizant of their temperament, because they haven't yet had the number of years to grow in virtues in the way. And that's what, of course, all the parents, the Colby parents, are trying to do, is help their children grow. But they've done tests, like psychologists actually have tested on temperament, and they don't call it by the 4 classic names like we do, but they will talk about the characteristics. So for example, you have someone who is very introverted, or very,
reactive,
slow to warm up, or, and they've done some research showing that if you just completely go against their temperament, you're going to have a greater struggle to accomplish the ultimate goal. Like, you're not going to take your very introverted, melancholic child, and when they're like 3 years old, and throw them in daycare, or into a really crazy, hectic social situation. That's just going to cause them to shut down and really freeze completely, or flee. That'll introduce threat mode immediately. So that's not going to be the way you would encourage your very introverted, melancholic to become more sociable, for example.
Right.
You want to kind of introduce it slowly. That would be kind of the thing. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there to, because parents will, sometimes parents will be tempted, especially if they have a bunch of kids that they're working with. They're going to say, well, this is the way we're doing it. We're all sitting down. Here's your workbook. Everybody do it, just do it. And that's going to work for one of the temperaments or two, but it may not work for all your temperaments. One size fits all.
That was such a colossal, is that the right word? It was a big revelation to me.
Yeah.
I have one, I'm melancholic choleric.
Okay.
And I had most of my first children were like melancholic, phlegmatic sort of children. And then I got a sanguine. For the longest time, I just couldn't figure out what she was doing. It was like, where is she coming from?
Yeah.
But then hearing about, being able to see some of, now then it's like, oh, what a breath of fresh air she is now. But for a while, I was not knowing about the different things, and just seeing a child act in a way that was so foreign to me, and so foreign to the way some of my other children had acted. Mm-hmm. It was difficult, but the temperaments helped me to see things from a different way that I was used to.
That's what we like to say in the book. Yeah, it's like, at first a parent might say, oh, did I do something wrong? Like, what did I do? Where's this child coming from? Did I do something wrong, or are they bad? Is there something wrong with the child? And sometimes it isn't. It's just a matter of temperament. So yeah, it's a great story.
It makes sense of so much. Really, really. It's been a huge help to me.
That's the goal, is to have your kids grow. You grow as a teacher, you grow as a parent, and you try to create an environment where everyone grows. That's what you're looking for. Yeah. So our view is generally to be very positive about the temperament. Yeah. So you want to build on people's strengths, and then you can always try to figure out, what do you do about the rough spots and the weaknesses, and how do you get that? So sometimes one of the temptations is to go after the strengths and reduce them. We're not too fond of that model. So it's build on the strengths and then find ways of reframing and helping the other tendencies to grow, like whether the introvert, teaching them skills so they can be more comfortable in social settings, or teaching a sanguine to the skill of being quiet. Every once in a while, at least, or a skill, you can be quiet. And so that's really, I think, the big challenge of maybe the challenge of life, of marriage, family. How do we create a growth environment? So the temperaments are helpful. One of the things Laraine often talks about, though, is sometimes she attributes it to original sin, is that when someone has a different take than I do, or a different way of seeing the world, there is a temptation, a knee-jerk temptation to see something wrong with them.
Yeah. Judge the person harshly.
I mean,
Yeah.
this may be everybody's struggle, actually. So one of the great assets we think of temperaments, and I use this a lot in counseling, but also just in life, is it creates a pause. So you don't automatically go into that negative sphere, that different reaction, like Stephen was describing this. All of a sudden I got a sanguine who sees the world quite differently.
Yeah.
So the temperaments will help you go, okay, rather than judge harshly or something wrong with this kid, say, oh, okay. And that pause is, I think, critical to create a more of a growth environment, and also to keep us out from just subjecting ourselves to our own temperament, but to be in growth mode. So that's one of the great assets of it, I think, is that puts that pause so you can respond prudently and not just react impulsively. And that's every teacher faces that, and every kid faces it all the time.
Yeah. We should probably describe briefly the 4 temperaments, right?
Yes, please.
Yes.
We keep talking about it, in case the listeners aren't familiar with some of the characteristics. But so the choleric, some people say, is that very quick, intense, and long-lived reactions. And they tend to be very determined, energetic, forceful, confident. They're very your natural, we call natural leader, not that they have they're not the only ones who can be leaders. Obviously, we think each temperament can be a leader. They're just going to be a leader with a different style. So, the choleric is just your natural take charge leader. They're ready to go. They want to be in charge of everything, the boss of all the people, and including the parents. And then there's the phlegmatic is your they're not going to naturally step up to be a leader. They're not going to volunteer maybe, but if you encourage them, they would be a great leader. We would say like the servant leader. They're very the humble, eager to pitch in, team player kind of leader. And the sanguine is the people person. They could be your charismatic leader. And the melancholic is the noble leader. So we think all temperaments can be leaders and should be encouraged to be leaders. But at any rate, so the choleric is your quick, intense, long-lived reactions. Always right. We joke about, so our youngest, who's the now homeschooling, she was helping us with this book, actually. Like she was kind of I had her read through list of strengths and weaknesses of each of the temperaments, and she's like reading through the list of it. She goes, "There's one thing I don't understand, Mom." She goes, "Why is always right listed under weakness?" Because of course, to her, always right. She was always right, and it was a strength.
Thank goodness I'm always right.
Yeah. I know. Thank goodness. Anyway, so yeah, they need to learn a little. They need to grow in the virtue of docility and obedience and empathy. That's something that doesn't come naturally to them, but they do have this incredible magnanimity, and they have that leadership ability, and they have great zeal and perseverance too as well. So do you want to do the phlegmatic?
Sure. Don't worry.
We'll go back.
We always spend more time with the choleric.
Yeah, I know.
They always come first. We spend more time on them, so we'll be sure. Phlegmatic is 180 degrees different. Their first impulse is to fit in. They're not thinking of leading, they're thinking of cooperating. They don't like to stir up trouble. In fact, they don't like trouble in any form at all, and they'll sometimes take an easy way out or not get involved in conflict. Cholerics like conflict, phlegmatics avoid conflict. And that's really where kind of the key thing comes in terms of, I think, education and growth, is where you're looking, where cooperation is needed. And as a homeschooler or any teacher, or any leader, you love phlegmatics because they're the only ones that will do what you say. And they'll cooperate. That's great. As we always say to parents, you haven't had a phlegmatic yet? Well, have at least one, because you want at least one kid that does what you say. You want just one of those. So they love peace. They love peace. Docility. And that's peace is a very noble virtue. It's the first thing Christ said after the resurrection of the apostles in the upper room. So there's nothing wrong with that. The challenge for the phlegmatic, though, is conflict. teaching your young phlegmatic or your old phlegmatic that conflict is inevitable. It's John 16:33, there will be trouble. So there is trouble. And the growth curve for the phlegmatic is how to handle conflict and disagreements and things like that in a skilled way, which doesn't come natural to them. So, yeah.
And in the homeschooling environment too, you may be just so happy that you have this phlegmatic that you just give them, you're just so happy. They're just filling out their little worksheets but they can be too dutiful. Like it's funny because we were reminiscing about our phlegmatic son, who now, only that he's an adult and he has four kids of his own right now. and he tells me, about the things that I did when I was homeschooling. And he was like, all you ever did was make me do these map skills. And I was like, oh, it was just so easy. Like, here, fill out this workbook. And he'd dutifully fill out this workbook, and he never really raised the objection, which is, this is stupid. And, why are you making me do this? And can I have something better? And so with the phlegmatic, you want to draw out of them. They're just so cooperative. They will just do what they're told. And you only find out, 30 years later what they were thinking. No, yeah, anyway. Yeah. So that was the phlegmatic. And the sanguine is your classic people person, the life of the party. They have quick, intense, but short-lived reactions. So that makes them, very eager and enthusiastic, quick to start new projects, but they're not very good with follow through. So they forget about it, or they get distracted and there's something else. And there's a level of distraction in the sanguine that is normal. And that's the thing, like, especially if you were a melancholic parent and you have a sanguine child, you're like, what is wrong with this child? They leave the house and they come back in 5 times because they forgot, they forgot this, they forgot that, they forgot what they were going out for or whatever, and they're always chatty and they're always busy and active, and they're like butterflies that flit from flower to flower. So with homeschooling, they're going to need a little more attention by the teacher, where you can like set the phlegmatic on, just here you go, fill this out, do your work, read your chapter. The sanguine, you may have to keep coming back to and kind of checking in with them to make sure they did, because they're quick on the in the beginning,
right,
to jump in and very enthusiastic, but then their enthusiasm wanes and something new catches their eye. And so, yeah.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
And then the last one is the melancholic. Melancholics are the most introverted. Sanguines would be the most extroverted. Stephen was talking about that a little bit.
Yeah.
And they are the most internalized. They really check out their own feelings, what's going on internally. They're very, very self-conscious in that way.
Yeah. Sensitive.
But it's very sensitive to what's kind of going on and what's happening or what's not happening. But they tend to have not necessarily a rapid response, but when they make a response, they usually lock in. Their yes is a yes and their no is a no, and it's sometimes hard to get them off that, even if it's important. The other wonderful thing about melancholics is that ideals come so naturally to them, and ideals are so wonderful. I mean, that thing that all of us are going toward, maybe it's to be kind or to be loving or love our neighbors ourselves or whatever ideal we're working on. That comes very naturally to the melancholics. They are driven by ideals, but the one caution with the melancholics is that one of those ideals can be perfectionism, and that can cause a lot of mental health and learning problems, because it's never going to be perfect. So if that's the criteria, you're setting up failure. They also can be very hard on themselves and others. They have high standards.
Yes.
And if you, the teacher, it doesn't matter you're my mom or dad, don't live up to it, I mean, I'm not happy about that, and I'll let you know. And that can be very hard on themselves too. Sometimes they can be a little more prone to discouragement, because it's just not right.
It's not perfect.
Yeah. So you have to sometimes teach them to be very happy with bronze and silver and not always go for gold. That's one of the things
flexibility
that we try to flexibility, and also ambiguity. And most decisions are actually not 100-0. They're mostly 80-20, 75-25. That's hard for the melancholic to learn, but they can learn it, but they have to learn it. So it's a wonderful temperament. A lot of saints, Catholic saints are melancholics.
A lot of artists.
Musicians.
Musicians,
I bet you find that, Bonnie,
I'm just thinking about,
A lot of teachers are melancholic. I think a lot of the people that say, I want to be a homeschooling teacher because I can do better, probably might
could be a melancholic.
yeah. A cleric too, but I mean,
Yeah.
actually, melancholic cleric maybe is what you get.
Yes,
as Stephen was saying, I think. So anyhow, I think that's kind of an overview of the four temperaments. Right. The obvious criticism sometimes is, well, I have all those things already. Right.
Yeah.
And you know, you did a good job of clarifying that, I think.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah. So it's not that there's, when we say, for example, that the melancholic loves high ideals, truth, beauty, justice, it doesn't mean the other temperaments don't.
Right.
Yeah, and the same thing, the sanguine is the most sociable. It doesn't mean other temperaments are not sociable. It does. We're social beings. We're all, you know, created in the image and likeness of God. We are in communion with other people. We are meant to be that way. But it's just that for the sanguine, which is the most extroverted, that the intensity of the drive to sociability is much greater than for the melancholic or the phlegmatic or even the choleric. So, and the same thing, the drive to the ideal is much greater in the melancholic. And I would say the drive for, you know, peace is greater in the phlegmatic. So, you know, so in other words, it doesn't mean we don't all need peace. We do. We all need peace. We all need all these things. But it's just that each of the temperament has a greater intensity in their drive to it. Which, yeah. Okay. So,
yeah. Once again, that underlining of like, it's not the extremes. You're not locked into where you are. Yeah. There it is again. Yeah.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Good point. And sometimes, as you know, when you're teaching, you can harness these drives and you can use them to your advantage, you know. So yeah, like with our sanguine, you asked about homeschooling earlier. We did homeschool for 10 years, because I'm part sanguine, with less effectiveness as the years went on. So for me, anyway, yes, then maybe another temperament might have been able to withstand it longer. But
yeah, we ran into something called math, and we bring in the troops for math.
Right, and I had a sanguine son who would say, he would call down, he'd be down in the basement watching TV. He'd go, Mom, can I watch Price is Right for my math class? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Sounds fun. Anyway, yes.
That's not our golden moment.
No, that was not.
We can all relate in various dimensions. Yeah.
But the sanguine, but it is a good example though. You can harness their love for their sociability or their love to being active and engaged. You know, you can use that in your homeschooling to help you propel you through whatever the difficult subject matter might be.
Yeah.
And each of the temperaments has something that you can work with and bring them forward.
Well, I bet our listeners are listening to these descriptions and thinking, oh, that's me, or that's this family member, or seeing this is kind of shedding light on, oh, this is why this situation might have gone this way, or this particular struggle we're having, this might have something to do with it or whatever. So I bet there's lots of light bulbs going off, hopefully for
yeah. Oh, I should mention that if people don't know what their temperament is, there's a quick quiz you could take online. It's called temperamentquiz.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could put that a link in our show notes. Yeah. So I can see how, and this is a suggestion you made to us as we were preparing this episode, I can see more clearly all the time how the temperaments can impact children's learning styles and kind of the parents' temperaments too, like what we bring to and what the children, their temperaments. So could you say a bit about that impact, temperament on learning style, and what parents can do to work with that a little bit more? Yeah.
Let's see. What do you want to start with?
Let's start maybe with the melancholic. They can be very bookish. They tend to like learning. I think they can really flower in a homeschooling environment where they get that kind of real individualized formation. So I think that's great. And so I think you can take advantage of that because you can slow things down and work at a pace, but they tend to be hardworking usually. One of the struggles though for the melancholic is anything new or different. They can make an immediate no. So one of the things we like to do, both in a business setting, Stephen talked about, but also in an academic setting or a learning environment, actually an environment, is when you give a new idea to a melancholic, you invite them to think about it, and then maybe you talk about it the next day. So I'm thinking about maybe changing the schedule. Instead of having this in the morning, I was thinking about having that in the morning. I was thinking about maybe doing it next week, but I'd like to get your take on it. Why don't you think about that? I'll make the final decision, but I don't want to make it without getting your take. I think if you give them some time to think about it, they're more likely to become compliant. If, however, you go, all right, we have new rules here now. Starting tomorrow, we're going to do da-da-da-da. They have almost a knee-jerk reaction if they're comfortable to say, no, I don't like that. Right. So given that their style is not, they don't like to make immediate decisions. They don't like to be forced to do something like right now. Right. Just not the way they operate, and they will resist. On the other hand, that's one kind of learning style we suggest to teachers and also managers managing melancholics is, they like to think about things. You can't spring things. They like to be deliberate. If you spring it, they'll just say no. If they deliberate on it and think about the nuances and maybe have some input, they tend to be very cooperative. So that's one kind of maybe a handy kind of learning style example. Another is the transitions. They don't like they have difficulty transitioning from one thing to the next. So for example, before we started homeschooling, our oldest is a melancholic, and we had her briefly in first grade, and it was chaos because like she would just get started, like the teacher would give an assignment. Here's where that perfectionism thing comes in, but the teacher would give an assignment and she would get started. She's making the most beautiful little drawing here, and it was a little book, she's making up a story. And then they would say, okay, that's it. Time's up. Now we're moving on to math. And she'd be like, no. And it would, to the point of like, it can have physical consequences. Like, the poor child would have a stomachache because like, I'm trying to do this perfect thing. And so for the advantage of homeschooling is, of course, they have all the time then, maybe not flexibility, a little more flexibility. Yeah, it's not all the time in the whole world, but that is the advantage. And of course she loved that, yes, you can work on this all day if you want, if you need to make your book, and that's one of the beauties of homeschooling, I think. But if you're going to be rushing, and nowadays though, even homeschoolers are going from activity to activity because they might have, a co-op or whatever, like our daughter does, but, so they'll have to transition, but just bearing in mind that transition, I think is really, that it could be difficult, and you want to prepare them for that ahead of time, not just throw them into it and, good luck, kid. Just to finish on the melancholic, maybe too much, but I think the sociability is a bigger challenge for the melancholic as well. So I think I was always impressed with Laraine, and when our melancholic daughter would go to a park, Laraine would be scouring what kids might get along with her. And then she'd look at the parent and she'd maybe go talk to the parent and maybe sometimes invite the parent to come over for coffee and bring your daughter. Which was very natural for Laraine as a choleric sanguine to kind of engineer encounters for our daughter. And that was really helpful. And she flowered with those. Would she have initiated them? No, probably not. And then she can miss out. So that's an example, I think, where the strength of the teacher parent kind of works with the challenge or weakness, like say, of the child. And you set up a situation that's very comfortable. Come to our house, play together. Maybe they become friends. Maybe they don't. So I think that those kind of things, or with the phlegmatic, maybe switching to phlegmatic, similar thing. Wow, it's great having a kid that doesn't interrupt. It's great to have a kid that's not being too disruptive and he just knocks his stuff off and then he's low maintenance. But the problem is then how to get them to step up to the challenges of life and the difficulties of life, because they can get very comfortable just kind of passing through. So how do you challenge them? Or they don't like to raise their hand in a group setting, or they're happy just kind of rolling with what's happening. So you can miss that kind of leadership quality. It can be buried in there. So you have to sometimes put them in situations where you call on them more, or you have them make presentations aloud and practice public speaking, for example, or things like that, so that these are things they can learn, but they're not things natural to them.
Right.
And also any time, I think with all 4 temperaments, always praising effort rather than say you're really smart or you're really wonderful or there's some research says that a lot of people, when they get that kind of comments, they put it in park.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm already wonderful. Well, that's okay. I won't do anything.
Yeah.
Whereas really encouraging effort.
Yeah.
And the phlegmatics will need that encouragement.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I see you got it done.
Well, they all
but you actually have to get some of them right. Well, let's go back and do this again, because I want you to spend 10 more minutes on it. You know, that notion that a kid who's bad at math only spends 3 seconds on a problem, and a kid who's great at math spends 9 seconds. Well, so it's just hang in there.
Yeah.
Stick with this and you'll get it. The phlegmatic will need that. They'll need that encouragement. And then when they do it, not just the product, but the energy towards it. That's where the reinforcement needs. Wow, you really worked with this thing hard. That's awesome. Or I notice now you dribble with your left hand. You used to not do that. That's great. That is great. They go, okay.
Yeah.
So they need encouragement.
They do absolutely, because the phlegmatic can get lost in the shuffle, and they're kind of used to being overlooked in a way because they are not the squeaky wheel getting the grease, which is probably the choleric. I mean, the melancholic can also, because they can be crying or moody or whatever, but the phlegmatic is so cooperative, they sometimes just get lost in the shuffle, and they need to be encouraged and praised, and also really encouraged to go deep. Like, instead of just like knocking off the assignment exactly the way the teacher said, well, is this they'll like, if you gave them an assignment, okay, I need do a book report on this book. They'll they'll do the book report on that book. But it's like, well, what book would you really what would you like to be reading? What is interesting to you? And really, when they're like, even in high school, a phlegmatic might just say, I don't know. They might not just have thought about it. They need to, and adults just spend time really plumbing those depths. That's really important for the phlegmatic.
But when you mentioned depths, I think that's a good transition to the sanguine. The sanguine is, like Laraine said, really dazzled by the front end of things. Yeah. So let's say if we break every task into 3 phases, starting, the middle phase, and then the end, the sanguine will be very excited about something new and exciting. Yeah. And they'll start a project 10 minutes before it's due at the end, because it's the end. So the challenge, actually the challenge for all of us, this is a good example where all of us, the middle is where the action's at. This is where a person changes and grows or doesn't, is the middle phase. This is why when you make a commitment on New Year's Day, if you just say, I'm just going to do this, but come around February or March, you're off of it usually. So how do you manage the middle phase? The sanguines have to really manage. You have to really manage the middle phase with them, with all of us, but really with them. Yeah. Because our initial excitement will wane, and then they'll do it at the last minute. Oh, by the way, I haven't started my book report that's due in 2 hours. That's next. Yeah. So helping them learn about the middle phase and stuff, that'll be what it would be. It would be a quicker goal. So you actually shrink the middle phase. So so for today, I want you to do this. Yeah. And this will be, I want you to give me an outline. I want you to pick the topic. And that's all I'm asking for you today. But really what you're doing, you're incrementally moving them along. And they will learn. They will be able to do this eventually, but it is hard for them. They will because they get distracted. And if you have a melancholic teacher, they think you should just say, okay, you've got a project due in 2 weeks. Okay, it's on this. Go for it. Yeah, and then but that would work for the melancholic. And probably the choleric maybe too. And for the choleric, but the phlegmatic and sanguine, they can get lost. They might. So you have to usher them through the middle phase and checkpoints and rewards for the sanguine of fun things. Yeah, it's almost like you're helping them build something brick by brick. Yeah, and you're monitoring each of the bricks. And we haven't mentioned anything about cholerics too. We'll do it. Let's do it. Because can't go without the cholerics. The cholerics must be discussed at all times. Take care of that, Lord. And that's what I'm doing. But it's like with them,
they think they should be, it should be like a completely brilliant and awesome the very first time they try it. So I know you mentioned, Bonnie, being you're a pianist, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, so when we tried to, the choleric daughter, take piano lessons, she thinks she can sit down and play, Beethoven's sonata right there, the first time. And it's when you're kidding me. I have to learn, this step by step by step. It's like, forget it. It's like, this is so, I want to be a genius right now. And it's the same thing with their projects. They want to knock it off. The first draft is perfect. Here it is. I just did it. It's great. And you're going to have to go back and say, no, actually it's not great. You need to work on this, and this. So, there is that. And then of course, there's also the problem of the choleric being, thinking they know everything and they should be, calling all the shots, right, in the homeschool. And if anybody out there has a choleric, one of the things you really want to be able to help them with is to practice empathy and to practice and to have the virtue of obedience and all these things. So it's a little bit, they can be challenging that way. But one of the ways is to help put them in charge of things, give them legitimate things to actually be in charge of, whatever it is. You can make up something, in your homeschool. But for example, if you have several kids at home, you can have the choleric child be tutoring a younger child. Yeah. And that builds empathy, puts them in charge of something, and gives them a legitimate kind of what is it, a legitimate form for their desire to be in charge to take, because they like to be in charge, they like to make the decisions, and they like to understand what's going on. They like to know why. I was thinking that debating and arguing is their love language. It's like, it's how they learn about things. So yeah, let's give them put them on the debate club.
Yeah, most motivational speakers are choleric, and you're teaching the world to be choleric, right? And you set goals and you go after them, and you don't get distracted. Well, that's really actually the way the cholerics are. So those things do work for them, and they're the kind of ones saying, you can pretty much say to a choleric, this is okay, but I think you have more in you. You can do better than this. Yeah. I'd like you to take another shot at this, because you can do excellence, and this is good, but it's not excellent. So I want you to go after that. Yeah. People will do that with all 4 temperaments, but I think the only time it really pretty guaranteed to pay the rent is with the choleric. Yeah. They can take a challenge because they have so much self-confidence usually that a criticism or two by a teacher or by a mentor or by a parent doesn't put them in they're not in a fetal position crying about it. Right. Now you do the same thing with a phlegmatic, and they just get discouraged. Like, come on, you can do better than that. What the heck's going on here? You do that with a phlegmatic, and they go, I just as soon give up anyhow. Why don't we just save ourselves? Yeah, save ourselves the trouble. Yeah. So with the choleric, you can do that. Now you have to be very specific what you're expecting, and you have to be realistic. But it's the one temperament where those kind of common sense interventions, just kind of rule the world today. Yeah, really are good. You can challenge them. Now, all the temperaments need to be challenged, but the one you more traditionally can challenge is the choleric. That's true. Is the choleric. Yeah. After you run a mile, but I'm fully confident you're not going to die if you run a mile and a half. In fact, let's see what your time is better than last week. Let's see what you can do. Yeah. They do motivate by that. The other temperaments, not so much. So sometimes using our normal leadership instincts works really well with choleric. That's why they do so well in schools, traditional schools, different environments, stuff. That's true. The goals are clear. I'm going after it. Yeah. But the weakness, particularly with homeschooling, can be so impactful, is they can roll over people. Yeah. And also, especially the brothers and the siblings, they might be younger sibling. Well, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Yeah. They roll over the teacher. They roll over everybody. So we always say when counseling people with choleric kids that are very opinionated and want to argue about politics and religion and all that, that's really great, but they just must do it with respect. Right. You can talk, we can debate anything in this family, but it must be done with respect. Exactly. Because if they get that empathy, respect thing, wow, they'll be wonderful leaders. As long as you say it respectfully. Yes. And that's hard for them. Yeah. Well, right. They don't realize they're just because they're right. Right. Always.
Yeah. So hopefully that answered your question about the learning styles a little bit about that. And we do talk about that in the temperament God gave your kids, but yeah.
Just recently, we had Johanna Segrin from the Interior Kingdom on our show, and she does some programs for kids about emotional regulation. And it was interesting. She was showing her chart, or she has a poster of emotions, and so you probably know about this, where it's like unpleasant emotions over on the left, and then to going toward pleasant on the right, and then high energy going down to low energy from top to bottom. I realized people listening can't see me gesturing with my hands, but so then she put little quadrants. So I guess these are standard things, but there'd be like volcanoes up for the high, unpleasant high energy, and then golden peaks for the high energy pleasant. And then she had a meadow down for the pleasant low energy, and then a rainy valley for the unpleasant. And when I was saw that, I thought, oh, this is where you're naturally inclined, as it seemed like to me with the temperament. So like that volcano area is, it can be that choleric. And then
you're right. Absolutely.
And as you were explaining these two, it made sense. It's like the choleric and the melancholic are driven in a way because they're inclined towards unpleasant emotions, maybe, perhaps. And so they want to do something about that. It drives them, whereas sanguines and phlegmatics are maybe more inclined to either calm, pleasant emotions, or happy, pleasant emotions. Less drive to move from there when you I don't know if it matches up, but I was just struck when I saw this chart. It's like, well, those are our temperaments, right?
Yes, I think it does match up, because emotions are also physically based, aren't they? So it kind of makes sense. I think that's fascinating. I'm going to see that chart.
I'm not that familiar with the chart, but the way you described it, though, of melancholics and cholerics being more comfortable with discontent or negative. I think that's really good. That's a very good insight.
Yes.
And concomitantly, phlegmatics and sanguines wanting to kind of stay away from that negative stuff.
That's so true.
That I think that's important too. I think that's a really good insight. So how do you make the phlegmatic and sanguine more comfortable with conflict? Because that's a key skill they must learn. And then also, on the other hand, how do you make the melancholic and choleric more comfortable easing into conflict and not just taking over with a strong opinion, because that alienates other people? So those are skills that are very important to learn, and really, I think you really hit a key thing, Stephen.
I'll send you that link so you can check it out.
Oh yeah.
And that's been, I really am fascinated by Stephen's insight there too. I think that's so interesting. Yeah. How do you like to introduce the concept of temperaments to kids and teens? Like to have, it's an ongoing discussion, like the whole knowing thyself is an ongoing thing. So how do you kind of introduce it to kids in that way that doesn't like, well, you're just phlegmatic. That's just the, like put you in that box. How do you like to introduce that and then keep the conversation going?
I think it's best to introduce the temperaments to kids when they're teenagers.
Yes.
Okay.
Not only because they're radically interested in relationships, radically. So you can say, well, you're a little, I know you're a little shy about going to the prom. I think you should go to the dance or whatever. And some kids it's really easy. Some kids it's really hard. But don't worry about it. We'll figure it out for you. Or she's really loud, or she's really kind of rambunctious and stuff. It doesn't mean you have to be that way. It's not the only way to be. You can I think the kids really, that's where I think that's like we get a lot of feedback from college students, because they're dating, they're looking for that special person and stuff. And the temperaments are very handy for that. I'm not sure what the value of the temperaments, maybe you could comment on that, is for middle school. I think it's good for the parents, teachers, though.
Yes.
For sure. But I think that's where they all of a sudden go from, they go from indifferent to radically interested.
They actually don't understand it in middle school, which is what I discovered. I taught a class. I was invited like several times until I said, look, I don't think middle school kids understand this. And what they don't understand is they don't grasp the concept of this is part of me versus this is the world that I'm in, because I think they haven't yet, they're, unless they're maybe really brilliant or something, but developmentally, I don't think they quite see how their personality differs from what is forced on them, because everything is controlled in their life. So for example, when I was teaching the little middle schoolers, I was explaining the concept of frugality, because there's some temperaments that are frugal and some that are not, so the melancholic is going to be frugal anyway. So I said, okay, so let's say your mom or dad gave you $1, what would you want to do with it? Would you want to save it? And maybe the next day they'll give you another $1 and you could keep adding up. And pretty soon you could buy yourself an American Girl doll or whatever, you can save up your money and you can buy something. Or as soon as your mom or dad gives you $1, you go run right out and buy some candy because you want some right now, and that's two different kinds of reactions. So, we're talking about this in the class, and this one little girl raises her hand and she goes, yeah, but what if your mom gave you $1 and then your brother stole it? Yeah. And I'm like, oh, that's not what we're talking about. So she sees her life is like ruled by, it's like, she can't see that there's something that's in her deciding what she's going to do with it versus what is inflicted on her from her siblings or whatever, so I don't think they're quite at the age where they were just befuddled. They were befuddled by the whole thing. So however, then I did do the same thing. I was also teaching in a class in the high school, same school, except different classes. And then the high schoolers loved it. Oh my gosh, they love it. Yeah, they're all over it.
That's
so
interesting.
you don't want to, I don't think you want to put them in a box. And probably the younger they are, the more likely they are going to put themselves in a box. Yeah. Because you're going to be explaining it and they're going to think, oh, this is it, you have to just be very careful. But another way to just have fun with it is there's the game, there's Know Thyself, the game of temperaments, which is just supposed to be a fun game to play with your family. We've talked to quite a few people who've had a lot of fun with it. You want to go into it with an attitude of fun, though. So, because like I had heard from some people, yes, of course, yeah,
right, makes sense.
There was one guy I did an interview. One guy said, I made my kids do this game, and and they were all terrified. And I'm like, well, look, gosh, you sound like a real
have fun whether you like it or not.
No, but this isn't how you're supposed to play it.
Okay.
It's called the game. Yeah.
Yes, it's called the game. You're supposed to have fun. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm just imagining my daughter bringing over a boy she's interested in for the first time. It's like, we're sitting down playing this.
Yeah, okay, we're playing this. Yeah. Poor guy's terrified. Yeah.
No. Of course, as the father of the daughter, you're supposed to terrify all those.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So you want to know what temperaments you can terrify them just the way
It's a very handy tool. Yeah. Well, would you say a bit about the intersection of temperament with mental illness, special needs, and physical or mental disabilities? As there are notes in each of the books that you've written that I have that speak to this, and I find it so valuable. And I would love for you to say a bit about that in this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, again, you got to be careful. All temperaments can be depressed. All temperaments can have ADD, ADHD, and all temperaments can mourn
OCD.
OCD. But probably it's not totally unfair to say there might be some proclivities that different temperaments might propel them to as well. So I think because let's say the introverted temperaments, the phlegmatics and the melancholics, they tend to turn internal. And so they might be a little more prone to ruminating and going over and over and over things because of not a real confidence of how to manage the real world. So they might be more prone to some disorders like that. Or if they have physical disabilities or whatever, that might be compounded for them because the kind of sense of being so keeping everything internal and things like that. So I think without that, those two particular temperaments, what I call the introverted ones, and we do take the introverted extroverted from the Myers-Briggs. We found that was a handy way to look at it. I think in those cases, you want to be aware of that. Ruminating is not the same as planning. You know, you want to carry out that because, you know, just going through your head. So let me help you figure out what the next step is or what the plan is. Let me help you with that. Or pointing out their strengths when they get into that kind of dour mood, or oh, I just failed at something, so now I'm a failure. And you say, well, that could have gone better. You missed the free throw at the end of the game, but you know, the only reason you're out there to miss it was because you're such a good player. And you know, everybody, you know, Michael Jordan missed more last minute shots, and Babe Ruth struck out more than anybody. So you know, you need to help them with this stuff because it's not natural to them to think that way.
Right.
Then go the other side. Let's say with the more extroverted temperaments, let's say sanguine and choleric. When they're almost a part of them is not used to having problems. They're pretty gifted and find a natural affinity to meeting people and liking people and taking charge. So when they get knocked off their horse, I guess it's St. Paul today. Yeah, I guess it wasn't on a horse, but anyhow, they sometimes they're kind of helpless. Like they're used to things just working out. Like the sanguine is used to, I can connect with anybody, but somebody just broke up with me, or I'm not relating to my teacher, so it's like a hopeless situation or something, or the choleric gets a bit bossy or get a bit deliberate. People aren't doing things the way I want them to do, and you know, they get put in overdrive and start pushing people away and alienating people and things like that. So I think with those two temperaments, you want to almost invite them into a more of an internal perspective on things. That, you know, just because things are different doesn't mean it's bad, or you know, some things, you know, you try it once or twice, it doesn't work out, just means you got to fine tune what's working, what's not, because they're used to quick successes and they can get easily discouraged and bossy, or in the case of the sanguine, just avoiding things, avoiding trouble at all cost. And you know, they can be real radical people pleasers. They sense what people want to hear and say, and they just say it, but they don't always do the work. They usually, when they get to college, they run into a brick wall about that. You don't charm your teachers in college. You can maybe charm your parents at homeschooling and stuff. But so I think that's really that the internal kind of, and of course the faith is great for both of these. The internal development that the extroverts need, the sanguine and the choleric, is critical, and homeschooling is a great environment to have the internal growth. So we're gonna say a prayer here. We're gonna reflect on it for 5 minutes. And what's the deal? What does that mean? You have that option. And then with the introverted temperaments, is kind of push them a little bit on the exercise. So we're gonna meet with a bunch of other kids on Friday as a regular thing. We're gonna have, you know, different homeschool groups collapse, and you're kind of pushing the melancholics to make friends, and the phlegmatics to introduce themselves, or you do it for them, because so I think that's where you want to balance that weakness. And then I think as they have their challenges and problems in their adult life, if they can go inside when they need to and outside when they need to, they're going to probably be better equipped, even if they have maybe a physical disability or they have intellectual disabilities. So those are a little more challenging, maybe. So that they're more. I think the whole person. You're trying to get the whole person. That's the Catholic view. And so, with the wonderful time you have in homeschooling, you want to always be grateful for the parts that are working, and try to be strategic about how do we expand the parts that they're not so comfortable with. You know, like Laraine said, the empathy for the choleric. So you know, or so does that help with what you're trying to get at, Bonnie?
Yes,
but
and go ahead.
I was going to say, they're not necessarily, as you said, that it doesn't necessitate that, like if you were melancholic, you're going to be depressed or something. That's any of the temperaments can have that, but they did do studies on that, where if you were of a certain temperament, like let's say you were introverted and a tendency to ruminate and this kind of thing, and you did happen to get depressed, then they found better outcomes with therapists. So if you were depressed and you went to therapy, you would have to give yourself more time. That was the thing they discovered. So that is gonna, which totally makes sense given the temperament, you know. So if you did have this, if you were actually, clinically depressed, then you would have to give yourself more time to work through it and maybe not snap out of it as quickly as another temperament would.
Makes
Right.
sense, yeah.
Yeah. So, because you were asking about the overlap between mental illness and temperament, I just wanted to throw that in.
I appreciate it. Also, the note about it as kind of a common theme that keeps coming up, how the temperaments aren't like a hard and fast box, whatever. They're not, they also don't explain away everything. So the presence of mental illness or some other situation, some other reality along those lines, that those are a factor separate from, the temperaments that are impactful on them, but we can't explain those away with temperament.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really well
Yes.
said, Bonnie. That's really true.
Right. Yes, exactly. And there's also the kind of the flip side of the one, like you think, it actually, these researchers, the one Chess and Thomas, they actually started, one of the things that propelled them was that there were kids getting mislabeled as ADHD when it was actually within normal of a temperament.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very, you do have to be really careful not to go either direction, I think, not to assume that they're going to be, yeah. And get professional advice. If a parent is concerned, I don't know whether my child is just like, this is just her temperament, or is there something going on, then get a professional assessment, because there's good Catholic therapists all over the country now, everywhere. True. CatholicTherapist.com, right? Yeah. So nobody needs to go without a professional opinion. And I think you should, because, there was a time when good Catholics were fearful of psychology, and, they would say, oh, if you're feeling depressed, go read St. John of the Cross. It's like, no, that's two different things. It's like St. John of the Cross was not going through depression. He had a dark night of the soul. It's not depression, so two different things. That's
good deal. Okay. That's a wonderful development to have the increase in faithful Catholic therapists available to us. And I know there's a lot of wariness about seeking out that kind of help, and for good reason. So yeah, but I thought it was important to make that distinction, to kind of put that note in there as well. So I'm glad you guys have that in your book. So I have some catching up to do on your books. I'm looking forward to that. You have the game that you mentioned, your website, which we will link in our show notes, which will have links to all of your offerings. Do you have anything else you would like to mention? Any other resources or recommendations of yours or others that haven't come up yet that you'd like to throw out to our listeners?
I really like David Isaac's character development. I think that's a fantastic book. Is that the name of it? Character development? Yeah.
That is the name of it. Yeah, it's a really good book.
David Isaac's. And it is so thorough, and it goes through all the stages of development and which virtue you can learn at which stage. In other words, you can't teach some virtues, you can't teach them when they're too young. And sometimes, parents think they should be able to do all these virtues all right off the bat. And he's like, no, there's stages you have to go through in order to developmental stages in order to be able to acquire these virtues. And he's got a breakdown. It's fantastic.
Nice. That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
It's a blue cover,
Yeah,
at least
is it
blue spine,
like
maybe.
Scepter Press, I think, maybe.
Okay.
I think it is. Yeah, it's really good. One book I find very helpful, because I'm maybe more for homeschoolers, because it really sees parenting from a teaching point of view.
Yeah.
It's called No Drama Discipline. And it's a really good, it's got all the neuroscience in it, which is, I think, very Catholic friendly. The neuroscience is very Catholic friendly. And they have that in there, and they're really good at not reacting, but responding prudently. To kind of put that little pause I was talking about earlier, when you're seeing your kid having trouble, or you're having trouble of trying to figure out what to do. It's also good so some temperaments are more likely to fly off the handle or get really upset. So the book is a good antidote to that. So it's kind of taking the teaching aspect of parenting, which is integrated in, of course, homeschooling. Though the church says it's always integrated. you can get some help at a school, but you're in charge. You're responsible.
Primary
And I think
educators.
that book, though, it's a secular book, but the research I think is solid. And so I recommend that to a lot of clients. And it seems almost all my clients are Catholics. They really like it a lot. So no drama parenting. And if you're, let's say,
Or is it no drama discipline?
excuse me, no drama discipline. That's what it is. Yeah.
Okay.
See, thanks for getting that. Yeah.
I will find those and include those.
Yeah.
Great.
That's great.
Is there anything else, Stephen?
No, I have more reading now. This is
yeah.
This is great. Gosh, it's been great talking to you.
Thank you so much.
What a
Yeah,
gift.
thank you.
What a gift to get to talk to you today. We really appreciate the time you spent with us. Thank you so much for all you've given to us in this conversation and all throughout your work that you've put out into the world for so many people to benefit from. Really tremendously grateful. Thank you both so much, Art and Laraine.
Oh, thank you so much for having us. This is
an
so
honor
great.
to work with
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Subscribe to the Colby Cast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@colby.org.
Mary, our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, pray for us. Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam.